Ever wonder how a simple day can flip your whole world upside down? Mine started with sunshine and watermelons, and ended with cold steel cuffs and a bruised ego. My name's Leon Mitchell. I'm 42, a former police sergeant who hung up his badge after 2 decades of service. You'd think after years of chasing criminals, I'd earn some peace. But life's funny like that. One minute you're defending the law, the next you're defending watermelons on a street corner. Selling fruit wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. No late-night calls, no sirens, just fresh air and sweet, juicy melons. That morning, business was smooth. My truck bed was packed with green striped beauties, the kind of watermelons people pose with for Instagram. No filter needed. But that's when Officer Travis Blake showed up. That if you've ever met a man whose uniform was sharper than his brain, you know the type. Early 30s, square-jawed, and a smirk like he practiced it in the mirror. He strutted toward me, boots heavy on the pavement, and barked like I was loitering outside a liquor store. Move this junk. You can't sell here, he snapped, hands resting on his belt like a cowboy in an old western. I stayed calm, reached into my pocket, and unfolded my permit. All legal, officer. Want to take a look? Blake didn't even glance at the paper. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like he wanted to fight. I said, pack it up, or I'll explain it in a way you'll understand. It was clear this wasn't about zoning laws. This was about ego. He didn't want a vendor. He wanted a victim that I'd dealt with bullies before. I kept my voice even, but couldn't resist a little bite. Maybe call someone who knows how to read, officer. Bad move. His face flushed as red as my ripest melon. He reached into my truck bed, grabbed one of the biggest ones, and with both hands, smashed it onto the pavement. The watermelon burst like a firecracker, juice splashing onto the sidewalk. That's what I think of your permit, he sneered. The crowd, small at first, grew fast. Phones came out, cameras rolling. In this world, nobody steps in. They just hit record. Blake wasn't finished. He pulled out his handcuffs and ordered, hands behind your back. I couldn't believe it. You're arresting me for selling watermelons? No reply. He yanked my arm, twisted it behind me, and shoved me hard against my own truck. The crowd booed. A woman yelled, he's done nothing wrong. But Blake looked proud, standing there like a soldier who'd won a war. Then came the cherry on top, or the melon. Rather, he picked up half of the busted watermelon, dripping with juice, and slammed it onto my head like a helmet. Sticky, cold, and humiliating. The rind rested on my skull, while seeds trickled down my neck. Now you look apart, he mocked, turning to the audience like he deserved applause that I stood there. The butt of the joke, every cell in my body boiling with quiet rage. But I'd learned long ago, never explode in the moment. Let the world do it for you. They shoved me into the back of the patrol car, like I was some armed felon. The interior smelled like sweat and old fries. As we drove, Blake couldn't resist poking. Think you're special because you used to wear a badge, huh? Selling melons doesn't make you untouchable. I stayed silent. Words wouldn't help. Not yet. At the station, Blake dragged me out like I was his trophy catch. Hey boys, he called out to the other officers lounging by the desk. Got a real outlaw here. Watermelon smuggler. The room exploded with laughter. I stood there soaked in juice, feeling like a character in some cruel slapstick comedy. Blake locked me in a holding cell and said, sit tight, king of fruit. You'll be here a while. As I sat on that cold bench, wiping sticky juice from my face, a young officer, maybe 25, walked by. He paused, looked me over, and whispered, you don't belong here. Tell your buddy that. I muttered. He glanced around and added, Blake pulls this kind of stunt all the time. You're not the first. A flicker of hope sparked inside me. Minutes later, an older officer, gray hair and sharp eyes, stepped into the holding room. His expression froze when he saw me. Wait, Leon Mitchell, that's me. His face tightened. He turned and stormed out, and through the thin walls, I could hear the storm brewing. Blake's name rang through the station like a warning siren. Payback had arrived. The next morning, the air in the holding cell felt different, tense, heavy. Then, the big man himself walked in, Captain Morgan Bryce. Tall, stone-faced, the kind of man who didn't waste words. His eyes widened when he saw me, like he'd spotted a ghost. Mitchell, what the hell are you doing here? I leaned back, calm as ever, selling watermelons, until your guy Blake made it personal. Bryce's jaw clenched. Without another word, he barked at the desk officer. Get him out. Now. Keys jingled. Cell door swung open. Bryce pulled me aside and whispered, this isn't over. I smiled for the first time. Oh, I know. It's just getting started. Leon Mitchell, once a respected police officer with over 2 decades of service. now found himself on the other side of the law. The long hours of service, the sacrifices, and the badges he wore, those were all behind him now. Now, he was a fruit seller, peddling melons from the back of a truck on street corners. To some, it was a fall from grace. To Leon, it was freedom. No more dealing with arrogant colleagues, no more power struggles. Just him, a pile of watermelons, and the warm sun overhead. But of course, nothing could ever stay that simple for long. That IT started like any other day. He was setting up his small stall, slicing open melons to display their juicy goodness, when Officer Travis Blake rolled up. Blake, a cocky young cop with a jawline that seemed chiseled from granite, marched right up to Leon. He had the sort of arrogance that came with a badge and an inflated sense of authority. "Hey, you can't sell these here," Blake said, his voice dripping with disdain. Leon sighed, glancing up from his work. "I've got a permit," he said, pulling out the necessary paperwork. Blake barely looked at it. "I don't care," he sneered. "Pack up your junk and get out of here." Leon, not one to back down, raised an eyebrow. "Is that how you speak to people you're supposed to protect?" he asked, trying to keep the conversation civil. "I'm legally allowed to be here, officer." But Blake wasn't hearing it. His attitude reeked of entitlement. "Do I need to show you who's in charge here?" Blake growled, moving toward the watermelons as if to make his point. Before Leon could react, Blake grabbed one of the melons and slammed it onto the pavement. The fruit exploded, sending juice flying everywhere. "That's what I think of your permit," Blake spat, clearly pleased with himself. Leon stood there, shocked for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "Are you 12?" he asked, incredulous. "Is this some kind of joke to you?" A small crowd had gathered, some filming with their phones, others murmuring. But Blake wasn't finished. "Hands behind your back," he barked, pulling out a set of handcuffs with a self-satisfied grin. Leon, now feeling the rage build inside him, tried to keep cool. "You're arresting me for selling watermelons?" he laughed, disbelief written all over his face. But Blake wasn't listening. He twisted Leon's arm and shoved him against the truck. The crowd started shouting, telling Blake to stop, but he just soaked in the attention. Then the unthinkable happened. Blake picked up a half-mashed watermelon and plopped it onto Leon's head, smirking as juice dripped down. "Now you look like a real watermelon seller," Blake jeered. The crowd gasped, some laughed. Others were disgusted. Leon stood there, humiliated, his shirt soaked through. But inside, the anger began to bubble over. He wasn't just mad about the arrest. It was the watermelon. Blake had taken his dignity and turned it into a joke. A sickening feeling washed over him. They threw Leon into the back of the patrol car. The sticky seats, a far cry from the front seat of a squad car he used to ride in. Blake strutted around like a man who had just taken down a criminal kingpin. "You think selling watermelons makes you untouchable?" Blake taunted through the rearview mirror. Leon didn't respond. Let Blake dig his own hole. As they arrived at the station, Blake strutted into the building like a conqueror, dragging Leon behind him. "Caught this one selling illegal watermelons," Blake announced to the other officers lounging around the station. Laughter erupted, and the jokes flew. "What's next, a lemonade stand?" one officer chuckled. But Leon wasn't just a random guy with a truck. He was someone who had served, who had a history. The ridicule didn't sit well with everyone. A younger officer, someone who had been watching the scene unfold, approached Leon quietly in his holding cell. "You don't belong here," the officer whispered, glancing around nervously. "Blake's got a record for this kind of crap. He loves humiliating people, and no one's ever called him out on it." Leon grinned, the fire inside him reigniting. "Well, looks like that's about to change." Later, an older officer, one who'd clearly seen his fair share of things, came by and paused when he saw Leon. "Wait a minute," he muttered, walking closer. "You're Leon Mitchell?" Leon nodded, a slight smirk on his face. "That's me." The officer's eyes widened. "You're the guy who used to run the precinct upstate, right?" He turned and stormed out of the room, and the shouting began moments later. Blake's name was mentioned frequently, and from the sound of it, his day was about to get a lot worse. Hours later, Captain Morgan Bryce, someone Leon had worked with in the past, arrived at the station. Bryce didn't waste time. When he saw Leon in the holding cell, his face went from shock to immediate concern. "What the hell happened, Mitchell?" he asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. Leon, staying cool, answered, "Just another day selling watermelons when your Officer Blake decided to make a scene. Bryce didn't say much more, but he gave an order, and in minutes, Leon was out of the cell. Blake suspended, Bryce said, his tone no nonsense. There's already an internal review. This will be handled. Leon nodded, his eyes narrowing. I'm not done with this. The courtroom came next. Reporters were lined up, cameras flashing. The tension in the air was palpable. Blake, looking less cocky than usual, sat at the defense table, his lawyer trying to spin it as a misunderstanding. Leon wasn't having it. I spent 20 years in law enforcement, Leon said firmly. I know what it means to wear that badge. What Blake did wasn't just unprofessional, it was disgraceful. The courtroom fell silent as the video footage of Blake's actions played on the big screen. The evidence was undeniable. Blake was convicted of misconduct, stripped of his badge, and fired. Leon walked out of the courtroom not just with an apology, but with a hefty settlement check in hand. Leon used that money to create a foundation for small business owners like him, fighting back against the kind of power abuse he had endured. His watermelon stand, now renamed Mitchell's Melons, flourished. Business was booming, and Leon was back on top. As for Blake, he was working security at a shopping mall. It seemed like his days of humiliating people were over, but Leon knew better. He wasn't just some guy selling melons. He was a man who had seen the system for what it was, and he wasn't about to let it crush him.